The Baroque and the Enlightenment. What is the Baroque? What is the Enlightenment? These words might sound familiar to you, but they are very complex because they refer to a vast array of artistic, intellectual, philosophical, architectural, musical, literary production, mostly during the 17th and the 18th centuries, although these are not fixed borders. I mean, some critics would argue that the Baroque actually started in the late 16th century and it's not something that is determined in every single country, mainly in Europe, or that the Enlightenment started in the early 18th century, late 17th century. There is a debate about that. What matters is that these are the predominant ways of expressing the culture of European countries, kingdoms, during those periods that are basically conceptualized with the idea of the early modern period in Europe. So the Baroque is in many ways a response to the Renaissance. The Renaissance, if we remember, was inspired by the classical models, Greek and Roman, with linear architecture, simplicity, perspective. Everything was about putting in the center the human being and expressing the beauty of the human being in relation to nature and to God. The Baroque makes things more complicated. It's a response in the sense that it is basically a way to make the representation of human beings more sophisticated and also more disappointing, because the consciousness of the passage of ourselves on this life, the precarity of our existence, is so predominant after the Counter-Reform, which is a response to Luther's thesis, that the Catholic Church enforced an art that was supposed to glorify God in the most significant, most proliferant way. So that gave birth to this trend called Baroque, which some critics argue comes from the Italian word barocco, which is a defective pearl, something that is not completely harmonic, completely symmetric. And then the Enlightenment is, in turn, a response to the Baroque, in the sense that it's, again, like a pendulum, no? A return to the classics, a return to linear forms, a return to simplicity, to symmetry, but with a big difference, the prevalence of reason as the matrix of human existence through scientific exploration and experimentation. So this gave birth in the 17th century to two important trends of philosophical thought, rationalism and empiricism. We're going to see who are the main representatives, what each of these philosophical schools consists on. The art is also so complex that it requires a special chapter. Baroque art and Enlightened art are probably the corpus, the body of some of the most extraordinary pieces of painting, sculpture, architecture in Europe. And then we're going to also explore music. Have you ever heard of Johann Sebastian Bach, of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart? Well, these names probably ring a bell. They're still present, they're still bestsellers. Mozart is very well appreciated everywhere, also in his native Austria, but in Europe, in the Americas, in Asia, etc. Why? Why are these musicians so important still today? What kind of art did they produce? And also in literature, there are wonderful writers. John Milton, the late Cervantes, poets like Góngora, maybe not well known in other parts outside of Spain, but immensely important for the development of the Baroque art. And finally, this multiplicity of forms, of trends, of styles, the proliferation of adornment the conception that we are in this earth just for a very ephemeral moment and that we have to think of what is transcendental, gave room to the development of rationalism and the confidence on experimentation. Rationalism and empiricism in some way, although they oppose each other in many aspects, they also supplement each other because they center the way of thinking in human reason. So the Enlightenment is this period in which, as the name says, it's also called the illustration. Things become clear. Reason can be a tool to understand the world, to modify society. We don't necessarily have to trust on the church or the religious dogma anymore. We can trust reason, we can trust rationality, social forms of democratization that started to take place in the 18th century. Think of the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and the birth of modern state nations in Europe and also throughout the Americas. So this early modern period that englobes the Baroque, the Enlightenment, is fundamental to understand our societies today in the early 21st centuries.